What's up, guys? It's Frito here for Your Overwatch. Today we're going to be going over part 2 of the Developer AMA. Part 1 we uploaded yesterday, talking about mostly Overwatch 2 stuff. You can check out the timestamps for any of the sections you're interested in. The developers go at length to explain more 2CP reworks, power creep, and information on new heroes. Kicking it off, the devs are asked about new hero additions and which roles they will fulfill. Jeff Goodman says that he would love to get the roster at 1/3 share each role. That's certainly a goal. But that being said, he says he's worried about going a very long time without any damage hero representation. If you look at the release history, we've been trying to push it towards an even roster without just ignoring damage heroes entirely. So I would imagine that means when we get an influx of heroes in Overwatch 2, they might be a bit more disproportionately balanced towards more tanks and supports to even out the roster, since that would be a good opportunity for them to play catch up. But at the same time, adding new stuff for DPS players to play 2 keeps the game fun. I mean, not even everybody plays 2-2-2 as it is, so they have to design for the entire player base. All right, this next section is about interesting abilities, both in development as well as in the current game. The devs explain that Orisa's first ult was an idea that she could teleport away, though it is different than you imagine, and then drop on the map via like a drop pod. But this is before they really sketched out the character and was designed to be like Dutch from Predator, hence the minigun. It ended up not working for gameplay and didn't make sense for Orisa's character, but much later they revisited the idea and put it into Doomfist's kit. That's how he ended up with his ult, so kind of interesting. On the niche ability front, they talk about Mercy's super jump, which if you don't know is some extreme tech that allows you to duck into a Guardian Angel jump to propel yourself into the air. Recently they have reworked it so it is more consistent and think it's okay, although they do explain that Genji ledge dashing in like 2017 or whenever it was cool but a bit too crazy, so they tuned that back. Jeff Goodman gets asked if this is their view on super jump, could they somehow make it into a more reliable feature that doesn't require some somewhat complicated button mash combo, and he says that's a reasonable request and he'll look into it. I'm totally fine with this because I don't think Mercy's that strong of a character without the super jump. It feels to me like everybody knows how to do it now, so I just sort of assume it's part of the character as is, so you might as well make it easier to do. All right, moving on, the devs get asked about and respond to power creep in the game. Jeff Kaplan responds to the power creep problem in saying, I think this is a good discussion, but I think a lot of the points get lost in the echo chamber of the internet. I'll see a good thread, video, etc. about power creep, but then there is a lot of groupthink that happens and you have a bunch of people who think they are agreeing with something when they really are not, saying things like power creep is bad. By the way, buff Roadhog, revert Ryan Earthshatter, buff Pharah. You should totally be adding way more new heroes and they all better do cool new stuff, and yeah, power creep is bad, which of course all of those things add to power creep, making things more powerful and more complicated because there's new additions. That's exactly what power creep is. So in this degree, Jeff's totally right that people love many of the benefits that come with power creep. And in fact, well, they can't add new stuff without adding a bit of it anyway. Jeff goes on to say, personally, I prefer when the conversation is more focused. Is time to kill too fast? Do we feel like crowd control is too much? And then apply all these things to individual heroes. We've added 11 new heroes to the game since it launched. Obviously, the game is going to change when you do that. We just need to evaluate each hero on their own and make adjustments. Jeff closes in saying, my personal feeling is that I would like to see less barriers and CC and see the game trend slightly in the FPS direction rather than the MOBA direction. And then Jeff Goodman, the lead hero designer, responds as well in saying it's hard to know exactly if lethality has crept up in the actual hero data or if it's the meta and or player skill has pushed up farther than it was, which is a great point, or if it's all just perception. But we've tried a couple of internal experiments where we've tried lowering damage and healing across the board and see how it feels. That experiment didn't quite work as a simple experiment because there are a number of heroes that have certain thresholds that break if you lower damage. We'd have to do something more methodical to test it properly, but I can tell you for sure the game doesn't feel very good when lethality gets too low, even if healing also gets low. On the healing front especially, once health bars are moving up and down a lot more slowly, it makes it really hard to feel like you're saving people in clutch situations unless you use an ult or something. Interestingly, on our list of experiments is is to try to make the game significantly more lethal than it is right now. I'm not sure how it will play out. We haven't tried it yet, but the goal would be to allow for more carry potential, as a great player would be able to more easily 1v2 or 1v3 enemies. Again, this would be just an experiment, but it's an interesting thing to potentially try. All this isn't to say we couldn't make changes to lower damage across the board somewhat, but we'd have to be very careful not to push that too far, because the game really does feel and play a lot worse when the lethality drops too low. So of course, I just made a power creep video talking at length about specific things. To be even more specific, I would say the power creep of the game has required abilities to be much more crucial, and fights that don't have abilities are much more severe than they used to be. So for example, characters like Winston or Lucio used to be able to, in the neutral, fight a Genji, but then they buffed Genji to be able to deal with Brig, who was meta, and now Genji can farm Winston's face, and that has happened repeatedly, where damage characters, in order to deal with the healing characters, have gotten more and more damage. Think McCree's right click and McCree's rate of fire, Hanzo's storm arrow, things like this. So because of that, normal neutral fights just don't even happen in Overwatch anymore, and you have to have abilities that interact. You have to have Sigma's grasp to get you 800 health just to tank, right? Winston can do it a bit with his bubble, but he can't take any damage to his face at all. It was always pretty bad to face tank, but now it is incredibly bad. So much so that I don't even think Roadhog is playable most of the time if anybody knows how to land an ability. That's why I make that point. Winston can kind of get away with it because he has a good bubble and has cleave damage and is a good tank to put resources into and can cycle primal if everything goes right. He's just barely playable. For the most part, otherwise, you need your character to have escapes or incredibly strong interactions to be any good. Whereas before, the basics of your FPS used to be able to work. This is the argument that Siegel made in his State of Overwatch video. Now, of course, my new stance on power creep is that it has kind of worked for this game, in the same way that I think it kind of worked in Hearthstone as well. But the truth is, we are deep into strong MOBA elements. I mean, the MOBA elements in this game are stronger than they've ever been in the history of the game, and to have any chance at all, the FPS elements have to be super powered on top of that and delete you. I think maybe a way that I can make this more clear is that there's different stages to team fights in Overwatch. There's the pre-fight, full 6v6, what I used to call the break of the engage, so when you start using all your abilities, and then there's like a mid-fight that gets traded out, where maybe there's like a 3v3 left. A lot of the power of the game is designed for 6v6. And time to kill and all of that seemingly makes sense more when everyone has their abilities up and you're tossing your abilities at each other. If you just look at that, then sure, when Orisa and Sigma have these cooldowns that give them effective 800 health and Batiste throws a lamp and everyone's immune, maybe all of that, when it collides, doesn't look like it's a different time to kill than back in the day when none of those things existed and it was more raw FPS, gunplay movement, normal health rather than ability health. But when those start to get whittled away and you're left with a Tracer late into the fight who has gotten buffed to have a chance in the Brig era, or a Zarya now that retains her charge forever and is always going to be at 100 charge late into the fight, right? Like, these things later on in isolated duels now are much more severe. This doesn't have to be a bad thing. In fact, I've come on board to it being what Overwatch probably has to be, and the only way it probably can get to work, because how else do you tune Widowmaker next to Genji, next to Doomfist, next to all these superheroes, right? An easy example is Sigma gets 800 health just about every fight, maybe even more than that effectively. But the damage numbers to combat that have also gone up, so the overall time to kill might not have changed. But when Sigma gets an effective primal rage on cooldown in terms of health, when he's played well, when you decouple that from the overall team fight interaction, well, then you notice how everything in those cleanup sections of the fight are just far more brutal than they used to be. Another example for you, Lucio might be great at getting your team into the fight, but who do you want left in your 3v3 brawling it on the point for the objective when kills have been traded out? Lucio or Brig, right? This is the current problem that we have now. So the stats at the break of the fight or in the ult fight might not look too different than years past in Overwatch, but you have to consider the power level of things at all stages as a fight develops, and I think that's where power creep is the most obvious. And perhaps in a good way, you can carry back fights now like you never could before, but you need to do it on the overpowered heroes like like, you know, Sigma being late in the fight just has a kill combo that keeps coming back and a shield that protects himself. In comparison, Reinhardt, away from his team, split off on his own, doesn't easily duel in 1v1s, right? There used to be a bigger cost to some of these powers, and it becomes more evident as the fight breaks out, I think. Last up, Jeff Goodman responds to the state of ultimates and if anything will be done to tune down how strong they are. Jeff Goodman responds in saying this comes up fairly often, and in the past we've done a few things to nerf ultimates already. We've nerfed the ultimate costs across the board twice now to try to make sure that they aren't coming up too often. We've tried to adjust ults that feel like they don't have enough counterplay, such as Sombra's EMP getting a longer delay before going off. Overall, this is something we're very aware of, and we're trying to make sure ultimates still feel like big moments within the game, but not just purely being an I win button. Abilities like Batiste Lamp were created to help open up more options to counter ults without requiring your own ultimate. Ideally, it should feel great to land a big ultimate, but also feel great if you can work around or straight up counter an enemy ultimate, which is also why we made changes a while ago, which made it so if you ever kill or stun a hero who was starting an ult, they always lose it. Previously, it didn't spend their ult meter until the ult actually started in a lot of cases. In general, this is a very tricky question and something we've been constantly tweaking and iterating over time. I think this question plays in with the power creep situation as well, where now we've seen some interesting developments going the other way, where a character like Genji, who got his kit over buffed, I'm not sure how it performs now since they've tuned it back a bit, but he could farm blades so fast that there wasn't a support ult in the game that could keep up with it. It was already hard to do anyway, especially if you were to like damage boost him or something. But now Lucio is just so far away from being able to time sound barrier effectively. That's another way that he just becomes worse. And because of that, you might as well just play Brig, have a chance to duel in the mid fight. And with how prolonged a lot of these ability exchanges are, Inspire is just simply better than a burst of support to save your team, especially when you consider how much space Brig can take by herself. So in the context of the game, I think the support ults are the weakest they've ever been, actually, with Rally being the best somehow, but also because, well, you just don't really need to save your team with a defensive ult, because there's so many ways they can defend themselves anyway, which is part of the power creep problem to begin with. Remember, everyone being able to defend themselves easily with cooldowns and escapes? And now, DPS ults are among the better ults in the game, when they used to be trash for like years. I mean, think how many times Deadeye's been buffed. Now Genji can reflect cancel during Dragon Blade easily, making it way better. Because shields are weaker, unless you have an Ana, there isn't really an economical way to disable Bob. He just gets tons of value now. So this isn't true of all of them, but there's many, many more great DPS ults when they used to all be bad, which I don't know how I feel about that. On the whole, they're probably still even with support ults, and maybe a lot of them are still worse. But next up, Jeff talked about one development regret he has, saying he sometimes wishes that they kept offense and defensive heroes rather than merging them into just one DPS category and only allowing offensive heroes to be played on attack and defense to be played on defense. I love this idea, by the way. He says that idea might sound crazy, but I think it would have allowed us to go more all in on some niche hero designs like Torb, Symmetra, and Bastion. Much of the issues we face with hero balance on these heroes is that players have expectations that these heroes should be fully viable in all situations, and that wasn't really their intent or vision for the game. They believed that with hero swapping, people would be more willing to adapt to solve the problem. He says they're fighting human psychology and game design, but yeah, I mean, this very clearly was a bit of a mistake. Trying to balance all things for all situations all the time at all tiers is not exactly a great way to balance the game, but they've tried their best. Next up, a lot of discussion was had about 2CP Reworks. We of course have the experimental card that's up right now, but much more information was discussed. Everybody's wondering where the Paris and Horizon Lunar Colony reworks are at. Well, turns out they're nowhere. They attempted a rework on Paris, but weren't pleased with the results, so they paused that and haven't even started on Horizon Lunar Colony. Instead, it looks like they're trying more ideas on the format of 2CP, or Assault, First, some examples of things they've tried over the years. They've changed the capture points to work like control points, as in the King of the Hill maps. They tried adding defender spawn rooms to point A, added a middle capture point between A and B, so a third capture point, moved the defender spawn back a bit on B, that would reduce stalling, and made it so that capture happens regardless if defenders were on the point. That would make things extremely attacker-sided and require the defense to be incredibly active, because they would be on the clock to finish the team fight, or else the objective could just be stolen from under them. Now, I don't think any of those eventually worked, but those are the ideas that they've floated and the types of things they've tried. Another one that gets brought up is a question: has the team ever considered having the ticks get capped at 25% instead of a third, so you'd be able to secure a tick earlier rather than needing that full third? And Jeff responds in saying they've tried all sorts of balancing points, including 6 ticks. So not 3, not 4, but even 6. He says it solved some issues, but created others. The more ticks, the more the defending team feels obligated to sit on points. Because if you think about it, if you can steal a tick away easily, anything that can just go touch point now has an increased power. And I saw in response to this, some people said, well, isn't that a good thing? We're incentivizing playing the objective. But I'll bring you back to the concept of Overwatch players typically don't understand FPS angles, right? Like, we already have a huge problem in this community where everyone just plays the payload and ignores the map design. Being able to give up ticks or give up progress before a tick is supposed to allow you to structure the engagement. So just being a martyr on point isn't the way the mode's even supposed to be played, but that's why they wouldn't want to do that, and why you shouldn't do that in the current format of the game either. But, well, guys, that's everything for the Q&A recap. Let me know your thoughts on any of the topics discussed today in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe. I'm sure to hit the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.